Your Partner in Success Radio is a free business podcast with host Denise Griffitts. It's all about great stories, conversation, and context to help you move your business and life forward with actionable tips and advice from her guest experts. To listen and subscribe, just find us on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you consume your podcasts.
Good morning and welcome to Your Partner in Success Radio. I am your host, Denise Griffitts, and this podcast is ranked in the top 2% of the most popular podcasts globally. And honestly, it's all because of my guests. They are incredible. I am honored and blessed to share time with people who are at the top of their game, and they show up here willing to help you get to where you want to be in life and in business. Now, these are not people who hold back. Their goal is to share with us the essence of peak performance. And I have the pleasure today of bringing back to the show Damon Lembi and Kandis Porter. They are the co-authors of Good Decisions Equal Success. And listen to this: Stop Decision Anxiety and Start Taking Action. I have that book on my desk. If you have ever found yourself paralyzed by indecision, unable to move forward due to fear or uncertainty, this book really is the book you need in your life. And yes, it is very much a part of my entrepreneurial library. And Damon and Kandis have both been here before, but separately. So today I'm really excited to have them join us together. Good morning, Kandis. Good morning, Damon. It's good to have you back.
Good morning.
Denise, thanks for having us. We're excited to be here.
I love that you guys wanted to come back. It's like we had said with both of you individually, they were terrific episodes. And I invite everybody to go find them. Just look for their names: Kandis Porter, Damon Lembi, Denise Griffitts. You can find us wherever you download and listen to your favorite podcast. But I've been watching you guys because I think, Damon, correct me if I'm wrong, that I was one of the first, maybe not the first, but one of the first people that you podcasted with.
You were probably, Denise, in the first 3 or 4. And I remember, it's funny that you say that, because I remember sitting here waiting to get started. And I was very nervous after listening to your show, because what a great show you've done. And since then, like we were just talking about, you introduced me to Brad Zollis and Meredith Bell. And you're like a mentor to me. And I'm hosting my own podcast now, The Learn It All Leader. And a lot of this is because a lot of the encouragement you gave me. So thank you for that, Denise.
Oh, I didn't know you had your own podcast, and thank you. And I'm really pleased about that. So be sure at the end of it, when I ask you where people can find you, to tell people where they can find that. Listen, podcasting to me, as y'all know, anybody who listens to this knows, I am a highly committed introvert. I mean, I'm rarely outside, and if I am, I'm hidden behind a black hat and black Ray-Bans, and I'm just scooting along. I don't dislike people. I just need to be alone a lot. And, as we were mentioning, you and I in the virtual green room, this is where I get to meet fantastic people from all over the world. And in so many ways, you become my mentors. So I'm so glad that it's working out for you. Good, good. Oh, and by the way, what Damon is saying here, that any high-level podcast host is going to introduce you to other high-level podcast hosts. I can't even talk this morning. It's just what we do. If your voice is so important to me as a podcaster, it's going to be important to a bigger audience. And we do what we can to facilitate that. So anyway, Kandis, let's start with you. Tell us about you, and then I've got questions. The first one being, how does making intentional decisions lead to greater success?
Thank you again for having us. I'm so excited to be here. And I met Damon. I'll start with that. I met Damon many years ago through a mutual friend. And we decided...
You dumped a pitcher of beer on me, I think.
I'm pretty sure I did. Actually, it was a whole tray. And it was also on your lovely wife.
So it was an accident. It wasn't deliberate. Let's make that clear.
It was absolutely an accident. Okay. And it was after a wedding, and we had gone out after that. And so we had a great time. And Damon and I, we were talking a lot about our businesses and work. And I think that we felt right away that there could be an opportunity to collaborate on something. And I think it was less than a year later, Damon reached out to me. on Thanksgiving, I get an email kind of through my website.
Was it Thanksgiving?
It was on Thanksgiving, I'm pretty sure, Damon, which I love because I think it shows how committed you are to your business and how committed I am to my business to be responding on Thanksgiving. But we started finding ways to collaborate. And I really love that, because one of the things that really bubbled up for us is how much we really love to think about how we think. And I don't want to speak for you, Damon, but decision making was one of those things that I think we both were seeing kind of trends where there were kind of some knee-jerk reactions or lack of structure for decision making. And we decided that we wanted to share some of our knowledge and the things that we've seen. But Damon, what's your thought? What's your side of that story?
No, I knew, from the after party at the wedding, from speaking with you and talking about the work you do around change management, and I believe you were teaching decision making at University of Nevada, Reno. There was a lot of synergies, and I really I love surrounding myself, Denise, with great people, great talent, right? Because I think that that's how you can evolve both yourself and your team. And so it was great to be able to get together with Kandis, and over the years, we were trying to find a way to work together. I mean, we work together at Learn It. Kandis is one of our top facilitators when she partners with us. But we were both fascinated about decision making, and we thought, hey, there's a lot of great books and resources out there, but let's come up with something from our point of view. And that's where we collaborated on for, I don't know, what would you say, about a year and a half we took to put it together and write?
Yes, that sounds about right.
I have to tell you guys, I love the Thanksgiving story, and it's how you show up in the world, because you never know who is going to hit you at that particular moment. And all of a sudden, they're very important in your life and will remain that way. I have a friend named Terry Murphy. She's very big in the real estate industry, and she's quite well known. And I was introduced to her by one of my contractors. He worked in my business, and I said, okay, let me give her a call. And I called her, and she picked up the phone, no joke. And she's Italian, and she's like me, no filters. I'm not Italian, but neither of us has filters, so we have to be careful when we start to talking. But I hear this beautiful Italian voice saying, who the hell else is working on New Year's Eve? And I said, me. And we have been fast friends ever since. So, those moments when they show up, take them.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's just important to get out there, meet people, and sometimes, Denise, you just see the synergy in speaking and working with somebody, and that's one of the things with Kandis. We built this friendship, both professional and personal, and we have these, I would say, bi-weekly 45-minute calls to talk about her business and talk about my business. And for all your listeners out there, whether you're a solopreneur or you run big teams, you want to find a couple of great confidants or mentors, whatever you want to call them, so that you're not going at business alone. So when I have a tough decision that I need to make, or something challenging, I want to be able to go to somebody like Kandis who doesn't have filters, or feels like they can tell me the truth, and I could bounce ideas off of. So I'm really grateful for having relationships like that.
These are the people we want around us. I mean, we don't want to be in an echo chamber. That does no good to anybody.
I completely agree with that. And I know Damon mentioned that you're a big mentor to him, kind of on the podcast side of things. And I have to say, Learn It is about to go into its 30th year of business. And my company, Effective Flow Connections, it's hitting its 8th year. And so I value having, a mentorship with Damon as well. He mentors me. If it's happened in the business world, Damon has seen it from running a successful business for, decades at this point. So I love that. And I love the echo chamber reference to Denise. I couldn't agree more with that statement.
And
Yes.
to add on to that, Denise, that's one of the reasons why we wrote this book, because I've made plenty of bad decisions, and what Kandis and I were hoping to help our audience is to help them shortcut and not make some of those bad decisions by teaching them or sharing with them some of our lessons from our experience.
I love this book, by the way. I mean, I have it. I have three, anybody who's heard me probably knows this, but I'll say it again. I've got three bookcases in here. They're, lean against the wall type of bookcases. And I have hundreds of books in here. Every single book in this room was gifted to me by my podcast guests without exception. I've read them all. I've reviewed them, but I have one shelf in particular that lives near me. It's right near my desk. I just have to kind of, lean over a little bit, look at the spine and grab the book I want. Guess what bookshelf y'all are in?
The best one.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I must have let in really good with that. But yes, I can spot it, and it's black and gold, which I love. It's yellowish gold, easy to find. It's a very smart, smart move on your spine. And I'll grab it and go, oh, because you never know. Listen, the thing about books is, for me, at any rate, I will pick them up in it, and they're fat. I put sticky notes all over them. I cannot mark up a book. My mother and my grandmother would rise up behind me and probably tap me in the head, and they're dead, both of them, but they'd get me anyway. You don't write in books. But I can pick up a book and it may not even open to a page where I've got sticky notes in it, but it's going to go and answer the question that I had before I even knew I had a question. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
I love books, and I do the exact same thing. You would laugh if you saw, my bookshelf, because I have sticky notes throughout most of my books, and I am guilty for underlining and highlighting in the books. So I feel
can't. We practically grew up in libraries in the summertime, and don't mark the books, don't crack the spine, don't turn the pages down. It stuck with me. I don't do any of those things. I did the other day, however, make a small notation on a book. And I was talking with my friend Ben Gay III on our podcast. And I had to admit that for the first time, I've had this book for a decade or better. I marked on the book. And then I had to grab my stomach. It hurt. I didn't like doing it. But it was a note that needed to be made, but still. But yeah, I love my books. So going back, intentional decisions, let's talk about that, because we make decisions all day long. But what I'm hearing from you, both of you, is that the intentional decisions are the better ones than the knee-jerk decisions.
Absolutely. And I guess I'll start by saying we do make so many decisions every single day that it's decision fatigue. And what we're really focusing in on for this book is those high impact decisions. And so it shouldn't be some of those knee-jerk or emotional decisions when we're talking high impact. It's really important to be thoughtful and to come up with a way to work through the decision-making process. And that's one of the things that we really like to introduce is be self-aware of kind of your emotions, think through the logic, and then let's go through this step-by-step process that makes sure you have the right people in the room as you work through the high impact decisions.
Can you give us an example? Because I'm going through something right now that I'm having to really slow myself down. And that's not easy for me. I'm not a slower downer. I'm just not. And I've had to sit back and say, don't do this on your own. Get advice, get other people's, you may not take the advice. You may not really, they may not really understand what I'm asking sometimes, but I'm not going to make the decision because I think, oh, this is really great. I haven't studied it. I haven't tested it. I've got to do it right.
Yes.
So you have examples, I know.
Yes. I got a very recent example, and it's true. And I talk about this quite a bit is I have I'm the high energy. I meet somebody, I like them, I just jump into things. And sometimes you have a knee-jerk reaction that doesn't work out for you. So for example, we recently transitioned out a fractional sales leader that's somebody who, works part-time for you. And we went out looking for another replacement. And so I set up an interview. The very first person I met, I thought was fantastic, fantastic. And my knee-jerk reaction, Denise, was, I'm just going to go ahead and hire that person, right? And, because I just connected with him and I thought it was great. Well, fortunately for me, Courtney on my team, I would say our head of learning experience is like, Damon, take a step back, read your own book. We've talked about this before. Let's look at different options and from different point of views before we jump in and make a decision. And that was important because at that point too, I think in a lot of intentional decisions, especially in professional decisions, I want to look at some of the people who would be affected. So this would be other people on our executive team, and even to make sure that there's connection with some of the people that they would be managing, the people on the sales team. So I didn't have my knee-jerk reaction and turn around and hire this person. What I did was we brought in other candidates. I used the decision matrix and that we talk about in our book, Kandis can share. And at the end of the day, after the 4 candidates, we found somebody who was an overall better fit for our team. And just like you said, Denise, even if you have people involved in the decision, they don't always get to make the final decision. I was the one who made the final decision, but I took the input from the other members of my team, really thought it through. And I believe it's been about 2 months now, about a month now, that I've made the right decision. And I look at it like the Damon of old might have jumped in and went down the wrong path right off the beginning. So that's why that's an example right there of being more intentional and thinking through your decision.
It's not the easiest thing to do, is it? I just wrote down while you were talking about, you decided to bring in other people and interview them. And I wrote down compare and contrast for some reason. But that's what you did. You compared and contrasted all of the people that were in front of you and then made a decision.
Absolutely. I thought it was important to compare and contrast and think about like long term, how is this person going to help get us to the next level? And what were some of the strengths that they had versus maybe some of the other candidates, and how would that work in our environment? So, yes.
Kandis, are there any key steps you recommend in the structured process, particularly when you're making high impact decisions? Are there some steps that people need to be aware of, or can you point to a chapter in the book where they can locate that?
Absolutely. I think the hardest step, to be honest, is the first one. And that really comes down to knowing what you want to get out of a decision. What are those ideal outcomes? And sometimes we don't slow ourselves down and say, what is best case scenario? And make sure that we understand and that those that we're asking input from understand, what are we trying to do here? Because there's a big challenge when you get people in a room or on a Zoom call or on a phone call, and people are not aligned on what you're trying to accomplish. And so that is where you have to slow down, and sometimes it's uncomfortable, and say, why is this decision needed and what are we trying to accomplish? And if you're able to do that and get people aligned at the very beginning, it makes a significant difference. And with that, I'm going to reiterate something that Damon said. I think it's really key to let individuals that you're collaborating with know kind of, are they making the decision? Are they making a recommendation? Who's the decision maker here? And one of the things that we call out and outline really clearly in the book are the decision-making roles. And so we have the driver of the decision. That's someone that's kind of driving forward the process and, collaborating with the right people and coming up with a recommendation. So the first D is the driver, and then an I is input. Those are the people we're asking input from. And then the second D is for decision maker. And then the last I is for implementer. So we've got DI, driver, input, decision maker, and implementer. And it's key to just outline those roles and tell people or advise them, hey, here's how we're asking for your input. And either You are making the recommendation, you are making the decision, we're listening to you, whatever that is, so that there's not these expectations that people think they're making the decision when they're really not. Because there's nothing more discouraging than feeling like you worked really hard and, oh, we thought we made this decision, but now you've changed your mind. So those are kind of the key things. I think the first step being really focused on what you want to get out of a decision, and then to clearly defining the roles.
And see, I'm hearing, listening to that, and having read the book multiple times, that I'm going to translate it into people hear what they want to hear. So you do have to be very, very clear about where you're coming from and what your expectations from them are, or you wind up in a whole heap of trouble.
You're 100% right. I think it's important to, especially if you're a leader of a team, that you want to generate ideas from your team, especially frontline people. But when it comes to high-level decisions, you want to be very, very clear. Like Kandis mentioned, and you, Denise, it's like, who's going to make the final decision here, as well as that after that decision, and I think this part's very important, that once that decision's made, if it wasn't your idea that was selected, we still need you to get behind this idea to move forward. And I think that, Denise, is a lot easier to do when you give people who are brought in the opportunity to share their ideas and their thoughts, and so they can feel like they've been heard. And once they've been heard and things have been, thought about and a decision made, then that decision is what the path you're going to go on, and everybody needs to get behind that decision as you move forward to execute on it.
I agree with you. And I've made this mistake so many times. I'm not going to give any case studies because I am the case study. But, I've made that same decision where I thought I was being perfectly clear, but other people heard it very differently than what my intent was. So now I have to make sure that when I'm putting out a proposition or I'm asking for assistance or feedback, that I'm very clear about what I'm asking. And then I ask them, is this okay? Do we understand one another? And they have to, well, no, not really. Okay, let's keep on going. But until you get that clear, okay, you can't keep moving.
Yeah, I have that same, and I'm going to kind of put Kandis on the spot. Kandis, do you have any advice on how leaders or somebody in the decision-making process can help make it crystal clear for the people, the stakeholders who are participating?
I think shared terminology is really important within an organization. And so having something that everyone understands the roles and, oh, okay, we are fulfilling the input role. However, Denise is the decision maker and, Damon is the driver. I think that it's important to have that shared terminology. And I work a lot in the project management world. I say the same with project management, that everyone can individually be fantastic project managers, but because of the experience that they bring with them, they're probably using different terms and taking different approaches. And until you get people aligned, then it's going to be an uphill battle. So shared terminology, and I think that comes through training, through communication. And I'm a big advocate when there is going to be a high impact decision. Let's really spend time on what we're trying to get out of it. And I work with a lot of leaders and say, let's come up with one slide with a simple statement on it, on what we're trying to accomplish. And let's all align on that statement before we ever go into the process. And let's start with that slide at the beginning of every meeting where we're collaborating or asking for input or even making the decision. Does this solve for this? And that, in my opinion, Damon, is one of the really key things.
I just wrote that down. Everybody listen. Does this solve for that? It's going on my whiteboard.
Good. Thank you for that, because I think oftentimes we are treating the symptoms versus that root cause. And if we're not taking the time to unearth what the real opportunity is or the real challenge is and solve for that, then we're kind of chasing our tails. And Denise, I know that you have cats, I have dogs, and when they start running in circles, you don't really get much done out of that.
No, you don't. And it can get hazardous if you're walking barefoot because a claw is going to get your ankle as you walk by. Just guarantee it. So,
Yes.
it happens. But I wanted to ask both of you metrics. Let's talk about metrics because I mean we're talking about implementing major decisions. And I can hear people say, "Oh, I don't have any major decisions to make today." Well, you will tomorrow or the next day, or maybe one yesterday that you completely ignored. Major decisions to me are made almost daily, and sometimes two or three major decisions are made during that day. But you said something, Kandis, that I wrote down. I read a lot when I'm listening to people. Communication. We all communicate differently. So I think one of the biggest things we need to understand is how we communicate and then just shut up and listen basically from there.
We definitely have to take into consideration different personality styles. And Denise, I love that you said that you're a committed introvert.
Oh yeah.
And we're a great group right now because you're a committed introvert. Damon, in my opinion, is very extroverted.
I think I'm an introvert. My wife says you're crazy, you're a total extrovert, but I think I'm an introvert.
I would argue with that. I agree.
I'm kidding.
Okay, good. I think you're definitely extroverted, and I'm right on the line, to be honest. I can be extroverted, but Denise, to your point, I have to spend a lot of time with myself and reflecting and re-energizing after, really stepping forward and being more extroverted. And these things are key when we're talking about a decision-making process as well. Because if we invite everyone into a room and we're asking for input, and we want it right then and right there, and we haven't prepped people accordingly, some people need more time to process, and some people can just, roll with it right then and there, sharing their thoughts out loud as they're processing externally. And so we don't always want, the loudest voice in the room and to think that those are the best ideas. We need to make sure that we're taking into consideration, prepping people in advance of what we're going to be asking of them. And you brought up metrics, Denise. Again, it's what are we trying to accomplish and how is it going to be measured? And sometimes organizations don't have the data that they need to even say, here's where we're starting, here is our baseline, and here's what we're going to measure against. So oftentimes there's work that needs to be done to say, here's where we're at. And I'll give you an example. If we're talking about retention, so we know that we've lost a lot of employees lately and that recruiting costs are really expensive and that it's hard to get skilled people possibly. And we're saying, we want to better retain people. Well, where are we at right here and now? What is that retention rate? How many people did we lose last year, last month, or so forth? And so we have to take the time to gather the data to really confirm, one, that the problem we think is the problem really is. And then two, well, where do we want to be if we're looking at data and percentages and so forth, and then work towards that.
That makes sense. Listen, I had a bad habit for a long time of not really tracking what I was doing during the day. I was busy tracking my employees. They're not employees, they're contractors, but I have a web development company. And, I was always working, always doing something, but I wasn't tracking. So I really didn't know where I was. I knew where my projects were. I knew who needed to be doing what. But I also crippled myself in many ways because I wasn't tracking my own metrics and moving forward.
I think there's definitely some discipline and you have to be intentional about that, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess I'll share, I was prior Air Force active duty and I worked at the Pentagon. That was my last duty assignment. And I really didn't track my time or maybe my accomplishments very well.
That's it.
And
That's what I was trying to say.
yeah,
I go to bed at night and I think, oh, geez, I've still got to do this. Oh, geez, I did not sit down or, I'm trying to go to sleep, which is not a high skill with me. So I would, that, and I'd say, Denise, whoa, hang on. You did this. Oh, good girl. Once I started tracking what had gone really well, I could kind of sort of fall asleep. But beating myself up over it, not good.
I think you just said something that I am also guilty of. If I accomplish 99 amazing things in a day, but there's one left undone, I
Doesn't that drive
tend
you
to
crazy?
I spin on that. And I'm just, rather than celebrating accomplishments and being like, it was a good day, sometimes I just spin on that. Why didn't I get that done? And I put weight on myself. And Denise, last time we were together, we talked a lot about how we work on the weekends.
We do. I will always. I enjoy it. I like what I do. So it's not a hardship, but I get a lot of people going, aren't you going to go to the park or go here? No, I'm going to be at my computer. I'm doing stuff. I'm building, but I'm doing what I love. But yeah, working on the weekends is probably not good for a lot of people.
I like it. I work on the weekends. I've got two little kids though, a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I do think it's important. I'm like both of you. I love what I do, so my mind's constantly going. But you got to make an active effort to step out of your work and focus, be present, because I don't want to miss those times with my kids and my wife either, of course. And I'm hearing what both of you were saying. I mean, it's easy to go through the day, and sometimes, Denise, even if you accomplish a bunch of stuff or you get a bunch of tasks done, you feel like, well, I didn't get anything done today at the end of the day. And I'm not a big journaler. I wish I was, but one thing that I've always kind of done is I have my, 6 or 8 or 10 annual goals and maybe 3 quarterly goals. And I try to make an effort every day to look at the top 3 things that I'm going to get done that are tied to those quarterly goals, which again will go back to my annual goals, and that's for professional and for personal. And there's that great book, I'm sure both of you read it, Eat the Frog. And so I intentionally try to get those things done first. Otherwise, I'll procrastinate. So if I get 2 or 3 of those done, then I'll give myself a little pat on the back. If I don't, instead of beating myself up over it, I just kind of reflect back on, well, what could I have done differently that would have allowed me to hit my goals for the day?
But see, I think girls think differently, don't we, Kandis? I mean, I love what you said, Damon. That makes perfect sense. It's logical, it's rational.
Well, that's nice. I don't know if a lot of people would say that I'm the most logical, rational, but yeah, it really helps me at least. And I agree. I want to hear what Ken has to say, but it helps me kind of just like walk in, and Denise, there's like 1,000 things going on. We all have 1,000 things going on, but to cut through all the noise, at least I'm gonna be like, okay, these are the 3 things I got to get done today, and I go from there.
Do something similar. Okay, Kandis, we do think differently, I think.
It's so fascinating as leaders. And I work with an HR leader that I respect very much. And her schedule, in my opinion, is insane. I mean, she constantly has a line out her door and people need her. And, they're always asking for her support. And I asked her one day, how do you get anything done? And her response was so insightful. She said, I knew the day that I went into human resources that my day was no longer my own, that I was here to support people and their agenda is my agenda. And that really blew me away because she's a people person and she wants to help people solve for their challenges and be there to support them. And I'm more of that kind of logical, let's make this list, and I need to shut myself in my office until everything's checked off this list. My husband laughs at me because sometimes he'll come home on the weekend and I'll have like this whole to-do list sitting on the kitchen counter and I'll be checking them off And he's like, oh, did you go to the store and buy laundry detergent? It's item number 3 or whatever. But we have to realize as leaders that sometimes things are more important than our immediate agenda. And so I think of the Eisenhower matrix, what is urgent and important? And that should really be that priority right then and there. And then, of course, there's things that are important but not urgent, strategic planning. We still need to do these things. And then there's things that just aren't important, but sometimes maybe they're being brought up by other people as urgent. And we just need to know when to say, you know what, yes, and not right now. That can't be my priority because I'm focusing on the important stuff.
And you're going to think I'm a lunatic. I thought I was a lunatic when I did it. I'm a list maker. I've been building lists since I was 3 years old. They're beautiful. They're color coded. They have check mark. They're good. They take a lot of time. And I finally started to give myself some grace from making lists all the time. But this morning I was doing something. I wasn't in my office. I was in another part of the house. And what I was doing was fairly important, but I needed bleach. I remembered my squirrel brain said, oh, go write down, bleach. Straight back over here, went into Walmart, added it to my list, went back to the other part of the house, completely forgot what I was doing.
For me, list kind of organize the chaos in my head. And so when I just have things spiraling, and I think that reactionary is a pretty common theme in the workplace, because every single time we're getting an email, it's context switching. So we get an email, we get a text, we get a phone call. Oh, someone's messaging us through LinkedIn, and it can really become overwhelming. And so for me to just slow down for a minute and make a list, and sometimes it's multiple times a day, it just eases some of that chaos going on in my head.
I'm laughing with you because I am so guilty. I have composition notebooks all over the house. And like the one that I'm scribbling on right now is for podcasts. It's got you and Damon, that's the header, on the pages, and I'm taking notes about what we're talking about because y'all say something really important, really insightful, and I'll have to write it back so I can go back to it if we have time. And these books never go away. I mean, I've got boxes full of them. I can probably write a book at some point with just the notes I've taken during my podcast.
Denise, you should. You absolutely should.
I probably will. I'm actually writing the close. I'm part of the closer series and I'm writing part 4, which is about podcasting and marketing and sales. So, and you'll be surprised what names are showing up in there. You guys will be in there. You're already in one chapter. So anyway, but we have so much to talk about. So we're talking about thank you, Damon. We're talking about major decisions. We're talking about, I know what I wanted to ask y'all. I'm getting ahead of myself. Can both of you share a personal story of a difficult decision that you had to make and how you approached it using the principles from your book?
Sure.
You go first.
Well, I mentioned
I knew that was going to make you guys go, what the heck is she talking about?
No, it's actually
a great question.
It's really a great question. I agree with that. I'll share that after being active duty Air Force for many years, your schedule and kind of moving around feels like it's no longer yours. And so transitioning out of the military is a really big situation because you have to figure out who you are and who you want to be. And I left, the Air Force and went into the consulting world there in Washington, D.C., which I am so grateful for because I've learned so much over the years. And I decided, after a few years that I wanted to explore. I wanted to live in a different part of the country. And I had never even visited the West Coast as far as California goes. And I felt like I was really drawn to California. And so I wanted to work towards exploring California and determining, hey, is that somewhere that I want to live? And so I set some milestones for myself as far as, hey, by this date, I want to go and I want to visit and I want to spend some time in this city and I want to do research and I want to look at the housing market, and I want to look at job opportunities and how does that compare to the DC market and so forth. And eventually it paid off. I got a job offer in San Francisco, and I had a really good understanding of what I was getting into when I ultimately made the decision to move cross country. Didn't know anyone in San Francisco at the time, and get established there. And I have to say, it really was one of the best decisions that I've made. And thankfully, I met Damon through this process. I probably never would have met Damon if I wouldn't have moved to California. But it is one of those things, Denise, where I could have made an emotional decision and just said, you know what, I'm going to move to California, and just packed up and went. But without having the data and the research and, an approach that unfolds, that you know what to expect, it's a lot harder to just dive right in. So I feel like it was the right approach, and that process where I really was thinking about intent and asking myself some hard questions, why do I want to move cross country and so forth. I got pretty clear on that right up front.
And a funny side note to tell you, to show what a small world it is, Denise. When Kandis moved to San Francisco, she, unbeknownst to us till much later, she moved into one of my family's buildings. We had a bunch of apartment buildings, and the gentleman who showed her, the leasing agent who showed her unit for the first time, is my best friend, Denise, since kindergarten. What a small world, huh?
No kidding. It really is a small world. And now with podcasting, with Zoom, with email, although I have to say a lot of it feels like contact sport, as you mentioned, Kandis, like we're getting hammered all the time. Emails, LinkedIn, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I shut a lot of it down. I have to. Otherwise, I would be biting the cat's tail. It would get ugly. But it's a small world, and it's getting smaller. And in many ways, I embrace that. In other ways, I'm going, oh God, don't come to my door. Just don't knock. I'm not answering the door.
Yeah. So so my personal story is kind of similar to Kandis, and this is directly from our book. Is we live in an area called Sausalito, and
Where I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And we were considering moving to Tiburon, a couple of cities over. And initially, my wife put together a pros and cons list, right? And I said, honey, that's okay. That's a start. But the negative thing about a pros and cons list is that you can have 15 pros and 2 cons, Denise, but you can't weight all of them the same, right? Because there could be big differences between something that's like a pro is like, oh, we're a block from the grocery store, versus much better public schools, which is far outweighs a pro. And therefore, what I highly recommend, and which Kara and I did, is we use a decision matrix where we took 5 key data points and we weighed them, on a scale 1 to 5, with 5 being the best. And we decided, looking at school, looking at finances, looking at the area, whatever it was, and we listed them out that way. So instead of using a pros and cons list, we used a decision matrix, and that really helped us determine that even though we thought Tiburon would be nice and maybe had more pros on the list, for us where we're at, Sausalito is a better place for this time of our life. So that's an example, and we kind of walk through. I don't know if Kandis wants to share more on decision matrix, but I'm a big fan of using it for high impact decisions.
I think that was really nicely said. And, when we're really talking about a decision matrix, we're talking about the criteria. So what is it that needs to exist for this decision to get the best possible outcomes? And sometimes weighting certain things, it could be overwhelming to people. And so even a more simple approach that we cover in the book is Moscow. And we use this a lot in project management for a lot of the projects that I manage or work on. And it's really what's the must have, should have, could have, and won't have criteria. So you see it abbreviated, MSCW, and a lot of people call it Moscow. So what must have, should have, could have, and won't have. And if we're able to think through that as far as criteria and frame it up that way, then Damon, to your point, maybe there's 2 deal breakers that are on that cons list. It's just absolutely not going to work out as far as moving in that direction. Those for sure can outweigh 20 positives on the pro list. So if we're talking about must have, should have, could have, won't have, that allows us to just shore it up a little bit cleaner versus just a simple pros and cons list.
Listen, I had that happen when I was buying my house. I live literally between Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, literally. And I bought my house during that time, and I bought it sight unseen because, as you can imagine, people from, companies from New Orleans and from Texas were just buying everything they could to house their people who had been, just tossed out of their homes. Their homes were gone. And one of my was, this is a deal breaker and don't even bring it to me, was an HOA. Not going to happen. And I was serious about it. So fortunately, I got the house that I love. I saw it that night after I'd signed the papers, and I fell in love with it. And I'm still very, very happy with it. But HOA, no, not in this lifetime.
I love that. And I think that people go both ways on that. Some people are like, I absolutely want an HOA so that, I know that things are going to be squared away with my neighbors or whatnot. For me, I have to have a fenced yard. Absolutely necessary. 3 rescue dogs.
Dogs,
I
right?
need that doggy door. And without that, I would just be miserable on a day-to-day basis. So it's interesting how we all have our own things, especially when we're talking about homes. And that's a big one. High impact. Damon and I get asked a lot, well, how do you define a high impact decision? And bottom line is, that's up to a person to decide or an organization to decide, because what's high impact to me may not be high impact to someone else. And so we have to determine kind of what's high impact for us, and then what are those must haves or, won't haves and so forth. But I love the HOA as an example.
And
yeah, it was a big decision to make, and I had to make it without seeing the house. I saw it from pictures, and I did trust my real estate agent, thank goodness. But, it was a year old. It had trees. I wanted trees. It had massive windows. I needed windows. There was no HOA. I said, I'll buy it. And I did that day.
That's great. And Kandis, when somebody asks me what's a high impact decision, it kind of like it was like what Denise just said. It's like if you're firm on something, like I don't want an HOA, boom, that's a non-negotiable. When somebody asks me, hey, how do you define a high impact situation or a decision? I'll say, think about a year or 18 months in the future. What's the worst case scenario of that decision? Is it something you could live with? Or is it something that if it's the worst case scenario, it would have a super negative impact on your life? And if it's something you can live with, even if the worst case scenario, then you know what? Maybe it isn't as high impact as if it's something that, like, okay, if we acquire this business and it goes south, we'll go out of business. So that's just a hack for kind of defining what a high impact decision could be.
And I wanted to ask both of you your thoughts on this, because I'm still scribbling. We're talking about high impact decisions. And I think, and you've mentioned it a bit, Damon, that those high impact decisions for me are the people I choose to associate with.
100%.
Okay.
I think as you evolve, get older through experience, who you surround yourself with is critical. You want to surround yourself with people who have integrity, have similar visions, align with what you think is important. Now, you don't want everybody to be exactly the same as you. I really believe, Denise, it's important to have diversity in your friends, so you can get different opinions and different ways to look at life. And I think it makes conversations a lot more challenging and interesting. But if you're surrounding yourself with people who don't have integrity, who, do make really poor decisions, that could have a huge impact on your life.
It can. And I wish people, it's marriage season, I think, right now everywhere. And, people say, oh, once we're past the wedding, we're going to be happy. What?
Or
What?
even worse, people in a bad marriage who say, well, we'll have a kid. That's going to turn things around for us and make
Oh,
things.
I know. They have not mapped it out. They have not done their due diligence, and they haven't made good decisions, and it impacts everybody. If you bought the house that's garbage, it impacts you. If you have a really bad marriage, it impacts you. If you hired the wrong person and then keep hiring that same type of wrong person over and over and over again because you hadn't had a sit down with yourself about it, that's impact. So listen, what I love about your book is you're really teaching us how to, sit down, think about it, communicate properly, follow some, I'm not going to call them scripts, but some really good advice in the book. But basically, what I take away from it is sit back, take a breath, and then make decisions.
I agree with all of that. And that's one of the things I was thinking when you were talking, Denise. A lot of those examples that were just shared, hey, after the wedding, things are going to get better, or let's have a child and see if it makes our marriage better. Those are emotional decisions, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
We're acting off of emotion. And so when you talk about slow down and think about it, it's similar to not responding to an email when you're pissed off about something.
Don't do that.
Oh, I'm
Trust
fired
me.
up. I'm just going to tell this person how it is. They
Never do
say,
that.
yeah,
I've
write
got so
it.
much better at that. Oh my gosh. I'll write it and then I'll put it in the draft section, walk around the block, and then or wait a day and say to myself, why would I thank God I didn't send that.
Oh, I'm even worse. I'll write it and then send it to a trusted friend and say, walk me off the ledge, and they'll rewrite it for me, which makes it acceptable. And I send that one.
Smart.
Well, I know my temper. I have to be careful. Listen, y'all, what are some common worst practices in decision making that our listeners should avoid? We've talked about marriage. We've talked about having, babies, adding more, all kinds of things. But what are the worst practices that you see?
I'll jump in here. And Damon, you mentioned diversity in your friends or who you're surrounding yourself with. I think confirmation bias is a big one, where sometimes we already know the answer and we just want to find all of the evidence that backs up and proves that we're right. And it's easy. It's kind of a slippery slope to start to go down that. And so avoiding confirmation bias, you should really go into something with an open mind. And if you're asking people for input, but your mind's already made up, oh, this is what we're doing, I'm just like doing it to check the box, then don't waste your time or anyone else's. Like legitimately ask for input and consider it and be willing to go in a different direction. But confirmation bias is probably one of those number one things that I think is danger zone for me, Denise.
Well, we, instantly just say, oh, yeah, I was right. I was right. And then that's where your brain stops.
Absolutely. And sometimes, ego comes into that, pride comes into that. And maybe we just don't like someone, whether it's at work, personally, and we just want to prove them wrong at all costs. And that's not the best way to approach, right? We need
No.
to just kind of take those emotions out of it. We need to look at things for what they are and gather that data. I'm a data-minded person. And sometimes I'm surprised by the data. I think that we are solving for a problem and we get the information or the data, and it's not the problem at all. And so I think going in as more of an investigator or a detective is a great approach when we're really trying to figure out what we're solving for in the first place.
Oh, I love that. Listen, as you know, I'm a web developer, and almost 100% of the time, in fact, I'm going to say 100% of the time, I'll have a consultation with somebody who needs a website, and they'll tell me, I want this and this and this and blah, 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 blah. At the end of the conversation, they didn't want or need any of that. They just didn't know what they were asking for. So I'm going to solve for it. And I'm telling you, it's going to go on my whiteboard. Does this solve for that? That's brilliant.
I love that example as well. And I see that a lot with clients that I'm working with, where we'll do an initial kind of consult and they have a laundry list of things that they just want some support with. And I always ask if we could pump the brakes. And I do something called a discovery phase. I always like to lead into consulting engagements with a discovery phase, where we dig a lot deeper than surface level. Because if you go in and you just start checking boxes and going through this laundry list of things without that vision, and I'm sure website design is a big one. You can't just start like fixing this page and adding a button here and doing, all of those different aspects of it. You need like a vision and a design, and everything needs to be connected in a specific way. So the discovery phase is often really hard and more time consuming than clients expect, because it forces them to dig a little bit deeper and to get clear on what they want. And a lot of times it's not what they went into the whole conversation expecting or thinking that they wanted. So It's just so important to pump the brakes and slow down and get that shared vision.
And I think what people don't understand about their website, their associated social media marketing, that's your online real estate. You better make it right. If you want big trees, have big trees. If you want a fence, have a fence. But don't throw out a whole bunch of garbage that nobody's going to understand. And this is something else, and I'm sure you do the same thing, Kandis. When somebody comes to me and they say, well, I want this, this, and this, I will sit down with them and listen very, very carefully. And I will ask them, where did you get these ideas? Well, they copied it from somebody else. So the answer is always no. Let's start over.
Well, I think the key point you're talking about there, Denise, is that you're sitting down and you're actually listening and asking. I think it's so important to ask questions, open-ended questions, and dig deeper into what people are actually saying. Where a lot of what I work with our sales team is, it's very easy as a salesperson who really wants to help, is when somebody says, okay, I want this, to just jump in and give them a solution. But what it sounds like you're doing, which is brilliant, is you're asking insightful questions, open-ended questions, and kind of digging deeper to understand, what the why is. And then from there, you can really formulate if what they're looking for is what they need, or it could be something completely different.
Or send them somewhere else, which I've done.
Oh, absolutely.
I will just say, listen, I'm not the best person for you, and this is why, but I would like to make some recommendations. That's just, you can't take all the business that comes your way. And Damon, I wanted to ask you, what advice do you have for leaders who struggle with decision paralysis, or paralysis? I call it paralysis by analysis, or fear making the wrong choice. How do you help them?
I think that's a great question, and it happens quite often to leaders. And for all you leaders out there, it's your responsibility to be able to be decisive and make decisions. Your team, Denise, is counting on you to be able to do that. And it's tough. And I think Jeff Bezos says it best, where if you have 70% of the information, then it's time to go forward and make a decision, right? You're never going to have 100% of the information that you need. And if you wait too long to be able to do that, then guess what? The decision you might make might pass you by. For example, if you're looking to hire a high-level top performer, and you've collected information and everything is pointing in the right direction, and you've checked a lot of the boxes, you've checked 7 out of the 10 boxes, and you wait to get more feedback, that person might take a job somewhere else. So my advice to all of you out there is put the right people in the room to get the feedback you need. Think about what the worst case scenario is, like we mentioned before. If it's something you could live with, and you've done your due diligence enough, then go for it and make that decision. And maybe even have a decision journal, write all that down. And if that decision goes wrong, all your decisions aren't going to go exactly the way you wanted, but at least write down the decision you made And if it doesn't go right, then learn for next time. But as a leader, you got to be able to get through that decision paralysis, which a lot of people struggle with.
Thank you for that. I have struggled with it. My other problem is I might be schizophrenic. I'm not sure. I have I have that paralysis too frequently, and then I knee jerk the rest of the time. So I'm constantly saying, Denise, I'm taking your advice, sit down, take a breath, study it for a bit, and then react. So I'm retraining how I operate.
I think too many, Denise, it's good that you understand for yourself. I think too many people, whether it's imposter syndrome
Got
or
that too.
or however you want to call it, are always, second guessing themselves all the time. And they're not giving themselves enough credit. And I think it's important to realize that, Denise, if you're struggling with imposter syndrome or double, or second guessing yourself, you get other people out there, like all of your guests and your listeners, who are like, wow, this person does an amazing job. We got to give ourselves a little bit more credit. And that goes for all of us, So sometimes you just have to stick your neck out there and do it. And the only way you really learn, I believe, a lot of times is through trial and error and failure. And you're never gonna get
Absolutely.
anywhere if you don't try things.
I learn more from my failures. And I've said this, multiple times over the years on this show. Entrepreneurs, if you're entrepreneurial minded, you have to have a cast iron stomach because we're going to fail multiple times during the day. It might be a small one. It might be oh, geez. Or, you know what? I'm going to take a nap and think about this tomorrow. I'm going to, do Gone with the Wind for the day. But we do fail all the time. But that's where we learn. It's like, well, don't do that again. Oh, I could have done something. I could have fixed it over here because we're always thinking.
You got to learn how to get comfortable with failure.
Oh, yeah.
As an entrepreneur, and especially if we're not a heart surgeon or a rocket scientist, you got to be able to get to be comfortable with failure. And I think that the greatest entrepreneurs of all time have story after story of failures and learning lessons from that.
And they share them with us because they're not ashamed of them as part of the growth process. So, Damon, Kandis, before we conclude this, I have one last question. Looking ahead, what other ambitions or goals are on your horizon? What's up? What do you have planned?
Damon, go ahead.
What do I have planned? Well, I think, Denise, I think one area that we all need to be looking at is how AI will impact the industry we're in. And what we're doing at Learn It is we're really leaning into how AI can make the experience better for our learners. So we're creating, habit coaches and other bots that will help enrich the experience of our students. So that's one area that we're leaning in as over the next 6 to 12 months to elevate Learn It to the next level.
Good for you. How about you, Kandis?
I love that because AI is something, generative AI specifically, is something that I think there's a lot of buzz around right now. And I've been working with a lot of my clients to, really help them understand that it can be used as a sounding board. Like it's not cheating on a test. Like when we were little, oh, you can't have a calculator for this, math test or whatnot. I also think about your example, Denise, as far as writing an emotional type of email. And, you can run that through AI and say, is this too emotional, or make this more professional, or, make this more clear. And ChatGPT is a game changer. So when I'm looking ahead at some of the things on the horizon, I'm also looking a lot at technology and some things that we can do as far as helping our clients like work better, work faster. And I want to reinforce as well, because timely decisions are absolutely critical. I don't want people to think, well, how are we going to apply anything in this book as far as a process? Because we move so fast. The thing is, just learning the process allows you to kind of do this mental checklist as decisions come up. Like, am I being emotional? Like, have I talked to the right people? Am I getting the buy-in from the right people? And so forth. So I know that that's a lot, but I don't think that you need to exchange, making timely decisions for a process. I think that they can go hand in hand. And when looking ahead, I think that technology and generative AI is going to be a game changer in coming years.
I do too, and I'm a techie nerd. I'm a nerd in stilettos. I happen to love it, but I also view it as a tool. And Kandis, by the way, you mentioned ChatGPT. Have you used Perplexity yet?
Ooh, I have not. I would love to learn more.
Go there and then call me. We can geek out over the weekend. You are going to love Perplexity. I like them better than Chat, but I will and listen, I write in my own voice. I do everything in my own voice, but I'll run it through. I use Perplexity, for kind of searching things out. I use Chat to clean it up. So I use both of them interchangeably, but we can't avoid it. You might as well learn how to use it and not be afraid of it. Kind of like your computers. Remember, you put you opened up that first laptop or you looked at your computer and said, it's going to kill me. I'm scared. We were all terrified of it. It's the same thing, basically. Well, listen, before we're going to run out of time, before we wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners? Any final thoughts, advice, or insights you'd like to impart? And how can listeners connect with you on the web?
You're up, Kandis.
So I was going to say, I knew he's going to toss it over to you. So.
Oh, thank you, Denise. This has been so enjoyable. I am so honored to be a second-time guest on your podcast. It's been fun as always. And connecting, I'm on LinkedIn, and then I also have a YouTube page. So it's Kandis Porter, and we share a lot of free project management, kind of decision-making type of knowledge out there on our YouTube. So if anyone heard anything they're interested in, there's a good chance there's a video out there, and that's a great way to connect.
And Kandis, by the way, for our audience, is Kandis.
Correct. And Porter, Porter.
Okay, Damon, you're up.
I'm up. So my last piece of advice out there for all your listeners is there's a lot of great resources out there around decision making. I think it's a valuable skill for all of us. So I recommend diving in, whether it's our book or resources on the internet. And you can connect with me, Damon Lembi, at LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we have a podcast, the Learn It All podcast, and we bring on a lot of great leaders and let them share their stories and everything. So would love to see you over there. So Denise, thank you so much for having us.
Oh, it has been my pleasure. I was so excited when I knew you were both coming back. So anyway, to our audience, as we conclude today's episode, your feedback means a lot. If you found the show helpful, please support us with a quick review on iTunes. And why? Because your input is vital in my mission to inspire and empower more individuals and colleagues. So don't forget to hit subscribe, leave a review, and share your Partner in Success Radio with friends. And be sure to go find Damon Lembi and Kandis Porter on the web and connect with them and get that book. It really does belong on your entrepreneurial library shelves. Thank you, everybody, and I will see you next week.
Get your voice heard. If you would like to launch your own far-reaching podcast, contact Denise Griffitts at yourofficeontheweb.com and go to the podcast tab.